You don't have to ride Jim Crow, no, you don't have to ride Jim Crow. On June the 3rd, the High Court said, when you ride in the state, Jim Crow is dead. You don't have to ride Jim Crow. And when you get on the bus, and when you get on the bus, said any place, 'cause Irene Morgan won her case. You don't have to ride Jim Crow. You don't have to ride
My
Jim
activism did not spring from my
Crow.
being gay, or for that matter, from my being black. Rather, it is rooted fundamentally in my Quaker upbringing and the values that were instilled in me by my grandparents who reared me. Bayard Rustin, born March 17, 1912, was born to Florence Rustin, but was raised by his grandparents. Growing up in Chester, PA, Rustin witnessed people fighting for their rights. And realizing how important that was, Rustin became a civil rights leader. What made him want to start changing the world was the segregation and injustice that surrounded him. Thinking back, it started in 1866, when the Civil Rights Act of 1866 was passed. This bill was meant to assure that everyone was equal and to be treated the same. President Andrew Johnson didn't believe that everyone should be treated equal, so he vetoed the bill, not once, but twice. The House didn't agree with the second veto, so the bill made it through. The bill was supposed to end segregation, but somehow segregation never ended. It was almost as if the bill had no effect. Bayard Rustin started his journey in the 1930s on a hunt to make society better and to get rid of racial injustice for good. He started with the Young Communist League's stance on race issues. He was there only a short time because they weren't progressing as fast as he was, so he left. Rustin felt as though there was more to it than just sitting around talking about the race issues. He then moved on and really began working in the 1940s when he protested against the segregation of the public transit system and their wrongdoings. Rustin wanted to do more after protesting, so he joined FOR, the Fellowship of Reconciliation, where he showed an outstanding work ethic. Rustin went there and gave it his all. He worked for hours and days at a time. Rustin never rested until his job was done. FOR wanted to spread their message, so they went throughout the South challenging Jim Crow travel. They felt as though it was necessary if they wanted an effective movement. FOR worked hard. It was their journey, so they named it the Journey of Reconciliation. Rustin quoted, "The Journey of Reconciliation was organized not only to devise techniques for eliminating Jim Crow in travel, but also as a training ground for similar peaceful projects against discrimination in such major areas as in employment and in the armed forces."
For men who are working in the name of God, how the hell are you going to get rid of poverty? All of the country people are telling me, you can't depend on the unions, they're anti-Negro, they won't stand with you. Well, I think the record here shows that in Memphis, this fight is going to be won because the black people of this community and the trade unions stand together, man to man.
Rustin resigned from the Fellowship of Reconciliation and went to work with CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, with James Farmer. Rustin and Farmer was two of the founding members of CORE. Rustin, now being a part of this new organization, worked to keep it up and running. While working with CORE, he did a lot, from marches to rallies. His work was his life. After a while, spending some time there, all the work that was set forth for him was done. Rustin felt as though his job there was done, so he left to study with the late Gandhi. He went to India to meet with him, but he died before Rustin got there. Even though Gandhi was dead, Rustin stayed to study the Gandhian nonviolent tactics. After learning more about nonviolence, Rustin came back and he put his skills to the test. In the midst, Rustin met Dr. King in the 1950s, where he helped guide him and change his view of nonviolence. According to Rustin, I think it's fair to say that Dr. King's view of nonviolent tactics was almost non-existent when the boycott began. In other words, Dr. King was permitting himself and his children and his home to be protected by guns. Rustin convinced King to abandon the armed protection, including a personal handgun. Rustin and King's bond was exceptional after this. After changing King, other leaders began to use Rustin as an example. They all knew that Rustin lived by the quote, "An eye for an eye will only make the whole world blind," so they chose to live by that as well. Rustin and King began working on many projects and marches together. They founded the SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He and King made that as a way for blacks in the South to come up and get help. Rustin and King had many protests and marches. One of the most famous marches was the Selma March. Rustin took a part in organizing it. After doing many marches, Rustin was later on told there was a job that only he could do. From viewing all his successful marches, he was chosen to organize the March on Washington. With less than 2 months to go, Rustin took the job and got right to work. When August 28, 1963 came around, there was a successful march where Dr. King gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. Due to the actions of Rustin and his leadership, he left an impeccable impact on the civil rights movement. He showed the civil rights movement and the people of our society today that you don't have to use violence to get justice or to make progress. An example of that is the protests and marches done for the injustice verdicts of Mike Brown and Trayvon Martin. Some of the marches was violence-free. They are similar to the March on Washington because they are fighting for a good reason. Rustin taught them that a little protest can lead to a big thing. Rustin quoted, "If we desire a society of peace, then we cannot achieve such a society through violence. If we desire a society without discrimination, then we must not discriminate against anyone in the process of building this society. If we desire a society that is democratic, then democracy must become a means as well as an end." Rustin is explaining here that violence is not the way to go if you want to move forward. It's only if you want to backtrack. Rustin influenced people to think this way. That's why there is a lot more nonviolent protests now rather than violent protests. For example, Michael Brown's parents stated, "We respectfully ask that you please keep your protests peaceful. Answering violence with violence is not the appropriate reaction." His parents were saying that violence isn't the way to solve violence. They understand how important it is not to fight back with violence and trust that whatever needs to get done can't get done through violence. Rustin instilled these tactics, not just in the people that surrounded him at the time, but also in our present time. Rustin affected a nation with his work. He left an impact that will live on forever. As we learn about Dr. King and other activists, we need to think about looking outside of that view to Bayard Rustin and other leaders who left an impeccable impact. Bayard Rustin left a huge impact on society. He showed us that nonviolence is also a weapon, and if you use it the right way, it will greatly impact you. Bayard Rustin left a legacy that is still being honored today. He was honored in 2013 with the Freedom Award by President Barack Obama.
Walter Nagel, accepting on behalf of his partner, Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin was a giant in the American civil rights movement. Openly gay at a time when many had to hide who they loved, his unwavering belief that we are all equal members of a single human family took him from his first freedom ride to the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender rights movement. Thanks to his unparalleled skills as an organizer, progress that once seemed impossible appears in retrospect to have been inevitable. 50 years after the March on Washington he organized, America honors Bayard Rustin as one of its greatest architects for social change and a fearless advocate for its most vulnerable citizens.
This is one of the greatest men and civil rights leaders that ever lived, Bayard Rustin.